Susan Fiske is a professor of psychology at Princeton, and I have her a fancy, well-organized card here. She is the Eugene Higgins Professor of Psychology and Public Affairs. She's a member of the National Academy of Science, a member of AAAS. I could go on, but please join me in welcoming Susan Fiske.
Mousing in front of people is sort of like parking with other people watching. There we go. I want you to know that this design of the slides is called Austin. So, just saying. So, I agree to a surprising extent with the speakers who came for me. We did talk about our talks beforehand, but somehow in the process, I found myself wanting to opt in, not opt out. But I'm going to come in as a little bit Pollyanna-ish. I think that the human motivations for people doing science can be harnessed to drive scientific integrity. That is, the reason that we went into this is because we want to know what people do and how they think and how they react. And if we can harness that and emphasize that in our training, then I think that will help. So scientific curiosity, all you have to do is read people's bios or ask them at a cocktail party, so how'd you get into this line of work? And people always start out by saying, I wanted to know why people do X, or I was puzzled by what people do and I wanted to understand it better. Do I have any data on this? No, but I would wager that you could have a lot of pretty interesting conversations at the various cocktail hours and parties by asking people this. And I think part of that is wanting to get it right. And a number of people in a number of venues have talked about this. So it's, yes, it's about having a career, but it's also about feeling like you learn something that other people didn't know, and you're adding to the edifice that we're all creating together. Now, it's also true that people want authorship and credit, and that's another part of human nature here. But I'm more sanguine about thinking that people are not going to do anything desperately to get credit, regardless of how robust and true it is. And I think that you can view authorship and credit as people's positive pride and ownership of the ideas and the findings that they create. And if those findings can't be replicated in your own lab and other people can't replicate them and extend them, then it's humiliating, in fact. And so I'm hoping that people care more about that than anything else. Now I'm already getting nervous because I've been here for a couple minutes and I haven't shown you any data. And I'm really anxious when I don't present data. So I did dig up some data. It's deeply flawed, but the venue, I think, is right. So Bob Sternberg and I just edited a book of ethical case studies. We took a sample of APS fellows and said, what do you want to write about in ethical issues in psychological science? And the topic, the most personally selected topic, was authorship and credit. So this is my evidence for people care about that. People care about ownership of their ideas. I mean, there were a lot of really heartbreaking stories, actually, about people feeling like they'd labored long and hard on research and the authorship had been botched. People do also care about human subjects, and they had things to say about that. But people care also about fabricating data, about ethical data analysis, reporting, and sharing, and about designing research ethically. So there are, these are spontaneous concerns that eminent people in APS care about. So, I think there are a lot of useful motivations here. Okay, end of data. So there are two readings of this. One is that people mainly care about credit. They'll do anything to get it, so we have to control them. Not my preferred interpretation. The other one is that people have pride in authorship. Botched credit bothers them, and so collaborators have to be clear from the start about who's, what you're doing in the enterprise together, who gets what credit, under what circumstances. And I have to credit my advisor, Shelley Taylor, with teaching me to be very out front and practical about authorship ahead of time. So what's more, I think that people do care about research ethics, and these paltry data suggest that. They care about the process of creating data in a way that has integrity. I'm not discounting at all Mahzarin's point about self-serving biases, but I do think that we have to remember that we're in this enterprise because we care about learning about people. So Diogenes was the guy who went searching for an honest person using a lantern in daylight, which seems interesting metaphor. I had always understood before I looked it up on Wikipedia that he was searching for truth, but he was looking for an honest person. So there you have it. Is it honest people or truth? It's a tension. But I think that we can learn from people in our field who have inspired us in various ways. Peggy Clark told me a story about her advisor, Judd Mills, saying that he was happy when people scooped him. I was like, how's that? And apparently what Judd said was, now I don't have to do that particular study because somebody else has done it and that piece of the puzzle has been supplied. So, this is inspiring to me. And it makes me suggest that the field owns the truth. And, is it personally frustrating when you don't get personal credit for something you thought of? Yes, of course it is. But what you own is the idea and the work on the idea in a timely way. If you sit on it for 5 years, it's the risk you take. Another person I'd like us to heed is Bob Rosenthal, who believed in incentives to replicate before other people were talking about that, and was reassured by people replicating each other, and really, I think, popularized meta-analysis within social and personality psychology. And I personally, I understand meta-analysis is not without flaws, but I do think that it's extremely useful, especially the moderating variables analyses that we do. So, I want to argue that most people in this room, certainly if you showed up for this, that presupposes you're self-selected, but most people in our field care about cumulative knowledge within the field, but I also think that we have to talk about it in terms of what do we export to other people and what policy ramifications do we want to talk about. We don't want to suggest to people that they base policy on yesterday's cool finding. We obviously know that. We need consensus. So Jean Borghita and I have written a couple of articles about the standards for consensus when we want to export things. And part of it is a matter of reputation. It's, again, caring what people think about what our science does. National Academy of Sciences reports are one of the gold standard versions of this. They specifically bring people together who disagree with each other on a particular topic. Do polygraphs work? Do polygraphs not work? If these people can agree over 2 years and $2 million worth of meetings, then that must be probably true. The annual reviews of psychology, the Psychological Bulletin, many of our narrative review outlets, have very, very high standards and peer review. And I think that that's one way of finding out, what we agree on. But this accountability is the thing that really gives us leverage when people ask our advice and want to know what we believe to be true in our science. Peer review, it's not perfect, but it's better than all the alternatives. And I did a lot of reading on the sort of philosophy of peer review, and I have to say I came away even more convinced by it. I've already talked about meta-analyses. Adversarial collaborations, well, they have pros and cons. Let's just put it that way. If you can persuade somebody you disagree with to work with you on something and to agree a priori on what will be evidence for both sides, you'll be amazed to watch. I have had this experience of how two people can look at the same graph and both say, I'm right. Just saying it's not a cure-all, but it's an interesting exercise. Okay, so Mahzarin already reminded us that there's pressure to publish, there's confirmation bias, there's self-serving interpretation, and so on. So this is the paragraph in the op-ed that says, I understand that point of view, and I admit its truth. But I'm going to come back as Pollyanna Fiske here and advocate that our scientific curiosity and our wanting to get it right and having authorship and ownership over ideas that you put out into the field and hope that they survive, and our ethical standards, which I do think that people have, and I think, human subjects, IRBs, have done a lot for us. These things have ebbs and flows. They've maybe gone too far, and, we all feel like IRBs have mission creep. And there is actually some federal momentum toward making IRBs more reasonable and to have them focus on things that are really worrying and not focus on ordinary questionnaire studies. We'll see how that goes. Stay tuned. But I think it's about the science. And you have to be willing to be pleased on some level when somebody scoops you and, you know, your idea was so great that somebody else thought of it and, you know, they did it. If you want to keep pursuing it, you'll probably do it in a different way, and that too will add to the science. Replicating and extending ideas that you think are cool is part of the system, and taking responsibility. Believing in our standards for consensus as well. So I want to thank you all for doing the science that you do.